Your breath freezes before it leaves your mouth. The wind is -30. There is no wood for 100 miles in any direction. And yet, you are alive. For roughly 20,000 years, this was not a hypothetical. This was daily life at the height of the last ice age, in the open treeless plains of Ice Age Europe and Siberia. No forests, no caves nearby, no metal tools, just wind, snow, and mammoths. So, how did anyone survive that? Not for a week, not for a season, for thousands of years across generations in some of the coldest conditions modern humans have ever faced. The answer is stranger than fire. It is stranger than caves. The real technology that got your ancestors through the Ice Age was something you are probably wearing right now. And it started with an animal most people assume was only ever food. Let's rebuild this properly, because the truth here is wilder than any survival movie. Around 20,000 years ago, in what is now Ukraine, a site called Mezirich holds one of the strangest structures in human history. Archaeologists excavating there found circular dwellings built almost entirely out of mammoth bones, skulls stacked as a foundation, jaw bones locked together like bricks, long leg bones used as support beams, arranged in overlapping, load bearing patterns. No wood, no stone walls. A house made from the skeleton of an animal that could weigh 6 tons. Picture it. You are kneeling inside a dome built from the bones of an animal your grandfather's grandfather might have hunted. Above you, tusks curve into the frame like ribs. Hides are stretched tight across the gaps, weighted down with more bone, sealing out wind that would kill an unprotected person in under an hour. A small fire glows near the center, not for warmth alone, but because without it, nothing else works. Why bones instead of wood? Because on the open mammoth steppe, wood barely existed. Trees need warmth and rainfall, the Ice Age simply didn't offer here. So people used what was actually abundant. And mammoths, dying naturally or hunted in numbers large enough to sustain a group, left behind exactly the kind of massive, durable material a tundra dweller needed. This wasn't desperation, it was engineering. But bones alone don't explain how a human body, with no fur, no blubber, and skin that cannot handle sustained sub zero exposure, walked outside that dwelling at all. This is where the real twist comes in. For a long time, researchers assumed fire was the single technology that let humans survive the cold. Fire mattered enormously, but fire only works where you're standing next to it. It doesn't explain how anyone hunted, traveled, or gathered firewood across miles of frozen ground. Anthropologist Ian Gilligan has spent years studying exactly this problem, tracing the deep history of clothing through archaeological and genetic evidence. His research points to something surprising. Tailored, fitted clothing wasn't a minor accessory to Ice Age life. It may have been the single innovation that made living in true Arctic and subarctic conditions possible at all. Not draped animal skins thrown over the shoulders like a blanket. Fitted, sewn garments, sleeves, layers, something closer to a parka than a cape. Here's how we know people were sewing, not just draping. At a site linked to Denisova Cave in Siberia, archaeologists uncovered a bone needle with a tiny eyelet deliberately drilled through solid bone, dated to roughly 50,000 years ago. Think about what that requires. Someone had to shape a sliver of bone into a point fine enough to pass through hide, then drill a hole through it small enough to thread with sinew without shattering the bone. That is not a lucky accident. That is precision tool making, refined over generations, purely to keep a needle thin enough to sew tight seams. Tight seams matter more than most people realize. A draped hide lets cold air flood in at every gap. A sewn layered garment traps a pocket of warm air against the skin. That pocket of trapped air is the actual insulation. It's the same principle your winter coat uses today. The animal fur is just a container. The trapped air is the technology. There's more evidence stacking up. Archaeologist Olga Sofer studied tiny impressions preserved in fired clay at Dolny Vestonis, a site in what is now the Czech Republic dated to around 27,000 years ago. Under close analysis, those impressions revealed something nobody expected: the pattern of woven cordage and possibly early textiles. Not fur alone, actual plant fiber weaving, pressed accidentally into clay before it hardened, then baked and preserved for tens of thousands of years by pure chance. So, by the height of the Ice Age, humans weren't just wrapping themselves in hides. They were spinning fiber, weaving cord, and stitching fitted layers with needles fine enough to close every gap the wind could find. Now picture the full scene. It's dawn, deep in the Ice Age. A hunter steps out of a mammoth-bone dwelling at Mezerich. Fitted leggings, sewn tight at the ankle. A hooded upper garment, layered, with sleeves stitched at the shoulder seam, using a bone needle, passed down from an older relative who taught them the stitch. Woven cord binds a hide over shirt at the waist. None of this came from one genius idea. It came from thousands of small improvements tested against real cold, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. Without that clothing, none of this works. No trip to check hunting traps, no trek to a water source, no survival past the first hard freeze. And this is the counterintuitive twist worth sitting with. It wasn't muscle and it wasn't raw toughness that let modern humans spread into the coldest parts of the Ice Age world. It was needlework. The species that succeeded here wasn't simply the strongest, it was the one that could sew. There's a deeper layer to this too. Some researchers studying the archaeological record, including work associated with Stephen Kuhn and Mary Steiner, have pointed to eyed needles and tailored clothing as one meaningful difference between the toolkits of modern humans, expanding into cold regions, and earlier populations who did not develop the same sewing technology as extensively. Clothing wasn't just comfort, it may have been one factor shaping who could push into which environments and when. So the mammoth bone house wasn't the real miracle. It was just the shell. The real miracle was smaller, sharper, and easy to lose in the snow. A sliver of bone with a hole barely wider than a hair, pulling sinew through hide, seam by seam, night after night, inside that bone dwelling by firelight. Here's where it comes back to you. Right now, you probably own a coat with a zipper, elastic cuffs, and synthetic insulation engineered in a lab. It feels like a completely different world from a bone needle and sinew thread. But the underlying principle hasn't changed in 50,000 years. Trap warm air against the body, seal the gaps, layer for the conditions. Every stitch in your winter jacket is a direct descendant of a technology invented by someone with no metal, no glue, and no pattern to follow. Just cold nights and a bone sliver sharpened by hand. You never had to invent that solution yourself. It was already solved for you tens of thousands of years ago by people who had far less than you and still found a way through. So the next time the wind cuts through a city street and you pull your collar up without thinking, remember what's actually happening. Your breath still freezes before it leaves your mouth. But this time, you are not just alive, you are warm. And that warmth has a 50,000-year-old signature stitched into it. One you'll never see, but one you are wearing anyway.